and welcome to the Cuyamangay Institute, our Q&A conversation for exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, our advisors, our volunteers, and supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamangay Institute is an independent nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience following the footsteps of our founder anthropologist, Dr. Felicitas Goodman. Our focus is reflected in three main areas: experience, education, and exploration. We continue to respect that path of academic balance, the creative pursuit of science, while advancing, conserving, and restoring a direct experience of that deeper human connection to all of life. It is part of our mission to expand our own experiential research with the multidisciplinary understanding that's available to us today. So, as an educational institution, we take an open approach and we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. And these weekly discussions have included neuroscience, anthropology, archaeology, eco-spirituality, philosophy, psychology, mythology, shamanism, the roots of theater, deep history, on and on and on, art history, from the arts to the sciences, and so much more. And you're welcome to visit our website at cuyamangayinstitute.com. We have a couple hundred presentations, both between webcasts and YouTubes. So please do enjoy that. All these presentations are free, and as a nonprofit, we invite you to become a supporting member. And we want to thank you, the community members, who continue to support the mission of the Cuyamangay Institute. Today, let's take a journey into the world of ethnobotany, the relationship between human and plants as we look from the indigenous and traditional knowledge point of view. And part of the study of medicinal plants, our guests will address cacao, that sacred history of chocolate, to launch our discussion. Ancient cacao ceremonies were used at religious ceremonies for marriage, for birth, baptism, and most all important ceremonies of the ancient Mesoamerican cultures. So evidence says that it might be as early as 5,000 years ago that cacao has been found. So the next time you reach for that chocolate bar, pause for a moment. Recognize the original spirit of that being that's provided this real treat.
Well, we know it as chocolate in a whole different form, and chocolate, who doesn't love it? $10 billion worth of cacao beans were produced and sold last year alone, mostly for the sweet, rich desserts in a gazillion forms that we know and love today.
Gazillion.
But the traditional form, the first use of the cacao bean, as you point out, also popular and highly prized in its day, was a markedly different concoction. We experienced that firsthand when we were invited to a cacao ceremony a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. And this was chocolate using ancient Mayan recipes, not the hot cocoa with marshmallows that our moms gave us, right? This was unsweetened, highly spiced, and sipped as part of a ceremony, celebrated for its other attributes, which, as its scientific name suggests, from the Greek theobroma, this is the food of the gods. Cacao is a mild entheogen with a dazzling array of mood-altering and health benefits. And it's just, I have to point this out, it's just one of the many food plants developed by the ancients of the Americas, these master cultivators and hybridization geniuses. When I say many, how about 50% of our food crops, from maize and grains, that's corn to quinoa, to potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, beans, squash, pumpkins, avocados. You know, we marvel at the stone monuments as legacies left behind by these ancient cultures of the Americas. But the Maya were accomplished on so many fronts: astronomers, mathematicians, scribes. In addition to master builders, they were also plant whisperers. And one of their gifts is this living legacy, the DNA codes for these highly nutritious sustenance that we still enjoy daily. So joining our long list of guests who have helped us celebrate the many legacies and traditional wisdom traditions, Let's welcome today ethnobotanist Nisao Ogata. He's here to share with us the full story on chocolate's long history, the ancient rituals, the sustainable agricultural practices, his work with many indigenous cultures in his homeland of Mexico. He's the member of the agroforestry system network of the National Council of Science and Technology of the federal government there. He's a full professor at the University of Veracruz. And in addition to ethnobotany, his research spans systemics, biodiversity, conservation biology, and this diversified agroforestry systems focused on cacao. That's his favorite. His experience working in Mexico with native indigenous groups include the Maya, Mazatec, Chinantec. I mean, just on and on. He's going to share on that. I'm just going to say he's the consultant to Mexico's national program, Sembrano Vida, and he's helping transform 1 million hectares of impoverished grasslands into agroforestry systems. Welcome, Nisao.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. First
Yeah.
of all, I want to thank Laura and Paul for this opportunity to talk with you about the research that I have been conducting on ethnobotany, cacao, conservation biology, and as agroforestry systems as a means of contributing to the development of indigenous communities in southern Mexico. So,
this is your life's work. Can you define your life's work for us? What led you to do what you do?
Well, it has been a lot of different aspects. I am not a person who is dealing with trying to know a lot of small things. I like to know
big picture,
a lot of wide things, and try to answer questions that are worth it. So,
what are those key questions? What is your quest here?
for example, how do people learn which plants are good for which purposes? For example, how are the processes by which people learn how to interact with nature? For example, people have different languages, and these languages are the result of the interaction with nature. Let's say the Mazatec people. The Mazatec people or the Chinantec people. The Chinantec people have one language with at least 11 different dialects. And this is one of the reasons is because they live in the Sierra Madre Oriental, the East Mountains that are so variable. And every part is a different aspect of the ecosystem. If the land is heading the sun, or is in the shade, or where the wind blows,
or the altitude, or
exactly. Yeah. And they have a single name for every one of these aspects of variation of the environment. And so that is one of the things very puzzling that I like to answer. The other one is how people, through this ancestral knowledge, have been able to solve their problems, their local problems, without a non-Occidental way of thinking.
Yeah.
So that's
what
the
is
idea.
Native to their history.
Yeah, it's how to learn how people solve their problems as a biological species, because for each question there is a solution, and there are many ways to solve the local problems.
So there's such a rich history for these areas in terms of their knowledge base. And this was, I mean, you were telling me that there are the Maya of a couple thousand years ago was more populated than Mexico is today, right? They were
Yes.
supporting a huge population with their agricultural practices, their governmental practices, and they were such experts. I remember reading that it wasn't just the plant hybridization, but that when the Spanish conquerors came, they didn't understand the value of what they were seeing. The beautiful fabrics that were grown, they were throwing them on the fire. These were precious gifts they were presented. They were just throwing, hey, we want gold, not fabric. They were slaughtering the beautiful sheep or animals that were giving them wool that was so fine. This was hybridized over centuries, so fine that you could take a huge fabric and run it through a tiny ring. It was so fine. And they were slaughtering them for meat. They didn't understand the genetic codes that were so carefully cultivated to produce these beautiful byproducts. And so here they come in, and my point is, so much has been lost, right? Only what, 4 codices of their books survive? Think about this vast library that was burned. So I mean, the information that you have that you're working with is just a piece of a vast legacy. And how do you look at that? And how do
Well,
you try to bring that into the present?
the thing is going back and forth. For
Yeah.
example, one of the most important questions to be solved is how do people in pre-Hispanic times
Yeah.
made to live and to use on a rational basis a highly biodiverse area. This is the tropical rainforest. In a tropical rainforest, you can find in 2.5 acres, you can find up to 300 different species.
Mm.
Wow.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And the thing is, what is more interesting in my case is how to know what were the mechanisms, the processes of domestication of the tropical rainforest, because the Occidental way of thinking of domestication is to subject, to dominate the plant.
Mm-hmm.
The plant will not survive without the power of man.
Yeah, right.
But the non-Occidental way of thinking is completely different, because they know they are not the masters of the ecosystem. They are part of the ecosystem,
Partners.
and they know that if they push too hard on one of the sides of the ecosystem, it will go back to them. The people living in high biodiversity ecosystems
Mm-hmm.
knows that, for example, you cannot cut the trees around your house because your house will get hotter.
Mm-hmm.
You need shade, you need trees. And in the case of the cacao is probably the most sophisticated agroforestry systems that human beings invented for the tropical rainforest in the world. And this is because cacao is the species of, this is not only the species of interest, but it's a high valuable component of the whole ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
So you grow cacao, but you have to grow the shade trees that will support the cacao, because cacao is a shade tree.
Mm-hmm.
However, since the Industrial Revolution, people, the money has been pushing for plantations growing at sun without shade trees.
Mhm.
And this is unfortunately what is happening in places like Brazil or Africa, Ghana, Cameroon, Ivory Coast,
Mhm.
where you find 14 trees per hectare, for example.
Trying to maximize its growth. That's it. Okay.
And in Mexico, you can find 350, 360 different trees per hectare,
Oh, yeah,
just
yeah.
for
Yeah,
you
I
to have
just
an
want to say
idea.
that it's really exciting to understand how artifacts can also be considered what was planted in those rainforests. We're finding that it's no accident that you've got the tree that provides the vines and the building materials and the foodstuffs and the medicine and everything else intelligently planted in groups to support a community. And that legacy now they're considering that didn't happen by accident.
No.
That was planned. That's an artifact.
Right.
Or this deep, deep soil with biochar and pottery and compost and everything. I mean, those are legacies, living legacies. And it's exciting
Yeah,
that you're looking at this and how it was put
exactly.
together. What's the wisdom? What's the intelligence behind it?
Mm.
What's the
Well,
mechanics behind it?
the main source is traditional knowledge. It's
Mhm.
the knowledge that is passed from generation to generation. Unfortunately, I cannot show you a video. I have an interview of an actual farmer who inherit the way of growing trees and the way of mimicking a tropical rainforest with a cacao plantation,
Uh-huh.
Ah,
where you can find, let's say, from southern Mexico up to Central America, there are more or less 3,000 different species of trees. From these, around 600, 800 species are common to this area. And from this universe, at least 250 are useful.
wow.
Well, the cacao plantations hold at least 1/3 of those species within the cacao plantation.
Yeah.
So that means that people have different items to be fed during the whole year.
Mhm.
Hmm.
In one side, they have the corn, but in the other side,
Yeah.
for example, if you want to transform a grassland, you start with manihot, with tamal leaves, with you start with small plants of avocado, orange, and so on.
Hmm.
By the time bananas, for example, by the 9 months, people is already harvesting manihot, bananas, and some leaves to wrap tamales
Yeah.
and things like that. So by the time you have this 3 years and a half, you have transformed a grassland into an artificial tropical rainforest. And this means that then you have like corridors between natural spots of vegetation
Mhm.
from where a cacao plantation can
Mhm.
serve for animals, mammals, birds
Mhm.
to go through from one spot to the other through these corridors.
Right. Look at
And
the whole
so,
ecosystem and its viability. It's not just a
yeah,
slash and burn. That's like, yeah, death.
no,
This is
no,
about work with nature,
this is a different
work
way of doing things.
because it's not just humans occupying that ecosystem. There's many other creatures there that you
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
thrive as well. So, wow.
Well, and before we go to the slideshow, I just wanted to say it's just so it just makes so much sense. It's so much a part of the human story that somehow doesn't get the center stage discussion that it deserves. What you're bringing to the table today. I mean, this is
Ancient wisdom.
how humans being able to work with in cooperation with the life around them in terms of survival. And recently
These are core values that we need to embrace today and integrate back into our practices, whatever we do.
and with some of the
right?
challenges that
Yeah.
we're experiencing with weather and with temperature changes that we're seeing, and some of the things that have been going on in the last couple of months, it does beg the question: are we ever going to re-recognize that ancient wisdom about how we have to cooperate with the planet? So anyway,
And recognize all the stakeholders
Yeah.
involved.
The main problem is that there's only one way of thinking that is being imposed all over the world.
yes,
Thank you.
And that is the Western way of thinking. And for example, we were born in the tropical rainforest, we have a different perception, a different interaction. For example, let me show you an example.
yes,
When in my hometown, my area, I live on the edge, on the riverside of one of the biggest rivers in Mexico,
Mhm.
the Papaloapan River. When the rainy season came 70 years ago, people knew, and there were floodings, okay? So the river overflowed, and there were floodings, and there were lagoons all over my hometown.
yes,
People, instead of getting scared and they just went to these lagoons and pick fishes, turtles, alligators, shrimps, etc.
right,
When the dry season arrived, all these flood areas got dry and became the most fertile lands on earth.
Mhm.
And then they had huge harvest of corn,
Mhm.
pumpkins, chili peppers, tomatoes, etc., etc., etc. And it was a cycle that everyone knew.
Mm.
And
However,
benefited from. Yeah.
right,
however, by the middle of the century, by the 50s, the Mexican government received a loan, the first loan in Latin America, to make a dam,
Mm.
to build a dam. And that dam was for the benefit
Mhm.
Sure.
of the Europeans that had arrived to the big cities that were forming, like Tustepec, Cosamaloapan, etc.
Mhm.
And they had in mind that the floodings didn't work because they wanted sugarcane, they wanted cattle, they wanted bananas.
Mhm.
And those didn't work for this environment. So they made the dam, they pushed the Mazatec people, more than 30,000 people were put it into the mountains
Mm.
just to fill this huge base of water to beneficiate
Mhm.
the rich people, descendants of Spanish, Italians, even French people.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow. You've worked with, I just want you to list, I couldn't pronounce them all. You've got a long list of indigenous cultures that you work with. Can you just name them? I just want to honor them.
Well, I have been working very close with people from the Mazatec group. The Mazatec is a group that have been living along these rivers and also up in the mountains. The Mazatecs, among others, in the highlands are famous because one of her priests was very famous, Maria Sabina, for the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms.
I see.
Well, I have been working with these people in the highlands, introducing digital digital devices
Sure.
for making digital contents. So the Apple company gave me a grant. So I went there, and with the indigenous teachers, bilinguals, we learned how to use iPhones, iPads, MacBooks, and they have been just amazing. I have the homepage where you can see what they have done. Incredible.
Wow.
In the lowlands, working with the same group of Mazatecs, we transform around 10 hectares of grasslands into cacao plantations.
Yes.
And we transform all that during 5 years. And besides that, as a side project, I work with women, and they were very, very good embroiderers. And the problem they had, these ladies, is that they didn't have good quality fabrics and thread. So we got a grant, and they were very successful. They went even to New Mexico to this World Handcraft meeting.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
And in 3 days, they sold around $8,000, an amount never seen in their community. So we have been working with these people. In the case of the Chinantec people, all these were kicked out from their lands because of the dams they built. So these other people, the Chinantec, they were kicked out into the south, to the very deep of the tropical rainforest, and there we reintroduce the cerdo pelón mexicano, which is a race of pigs that were brought by Cortés in 1519, and they were these huge pigs that, when you have population of animals for many generations towards the equator, they tend to shrink. So they became these small pigs, very, very tasty, and they have the ability to absorb what they eat. So if you give them nuts, the meat tastes like nuts. And
Like grapes and wine. Okay.
And what we made was a system for bringing a set of animals, and we gave one animal per family. And when the family number one, their pig gave birth, they kept only one for them to raise it, and the other were given to people who doesn't have animals. And in this, a parceria, we call it. And with this experiment, in a lapse of 6-7 months, from 70 animals, we reached like 500. And it was a very, very big success. In Tabasco, I was working with people who have cacao plantations, and they have a mess of varieties within their plantation, a mess of varieties of cacao. So what we did was to pick just one variety, select it, ferment it, dry it, toast it, and then I collaborated with a chef, and together they made a special kind of high quality chocolate.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And it was a really, really big success. Nowadays, these families got independent, and they are selling chocolate, different types. And with these, they are earning more money than the usual way that is to sell the seeds just fresh.
Wow.
Wonderful. That's so fantastic to create the
Exciting.
sustenance. And well, let's talk about that sacred history of chocolate, the cacao. I know you have a slide presentation you'd like to share. So let's go ahead and load that up and we'll go through that as well. Take us on this journey of your exploration.
Okay, let me see what it is.
You said there were 3 main lessons that you want to
Oh,
unpack.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the 3 main lessons that we need to learn from the cultures developing in tropical rainforests has to do with how they built complex. There you go. Let me go to this one.
Okay.
So I have to remind you that Mexico is the second highest biocultural diversity on Earth, based on the number of species, indigenous group, languages, and ways of making agriculture. And the 3 lessons that we need to learn is basic to recover the know-how to make a rational use of tropical rainforest. The first one is the ability of these people for the construction of complex societies in tropical rainforests. The second one is how these people create surpluses of food that allows them the diversification of activities such as agriculture, architecture, engineering, medicine, but first and most important, at least to me, the ability to create art. And art understood as the highest human expression of aesthetic harmony and communication with nature.
Like that.
As a result of the development of these cultures, we have several things like there's no evidence of massive extinctions due to the presence of Mesoamerican cultures before the arrival of the Spanish. Like if you make a comparison, just check what happened in Australia. As soon as the English arrived, boom, the dodo and blah, blah, blah disappeared. However, this knowledge up to date is neglected. And what I was trying to highlight is that the problems we are dealing is how the tropical rainforest has been developed. This, for example, is a natural rainforest that right away is transformed into this. This rainforest is transformed into this. This is the one left stand. And what for? To make sugarcane plantations, citrus, banana, cattle. All of them are predatory agricultural systems that only create more poverty, more environmental deterioration, more concentration of wealth in few people. And now cacao cultivation is contributing to that. So how are we gonna reverse this situation? That is one of the problems, because we don't forget that most of the food that people eat all over the world is produced in underdeveloped countries like Mexico, and the families are 570 million families that for producing, they don't use more than their own hand labor of the family. However, people is still blamed for this economical crisis, accused of rapers, thieves, and you know the story. However, people is not giving up. People is fighting, people is working and trying to develop themselves. Just for you to have an idea, in 2022, the hand labor working of Mexicans in the United States sent to Mexico almost $60,000 million. more than agrobusiness. For example, we are very proud that we sell beer all over the world. However, if you pay close attention, what we sell is water, because all the ingredients to make beer are imported from Canada, from Germany, from all over the world.
Mm.
So we don't sell beer, we sell water.
Mm.
So how to reverse those problems? And what I am doing is try to look at the past, lessons from the past. And for this, I am taking into consideration, for example, the Olmec, the mother of Mesoamerican cultures. And these are landed in Veracruz state, in the Gulf of Mexico. See? And what I want is to show you a very brief example of one of the huge, biggest invention that is showing us that nothing is at random. This is a celebration with this statue of the god of corn. It's called the Lord of las Limas, who represents the god of corn. And this celebration is to show you how these people made from this grass that you can see there's only one row of seeds.
Hmm.
How these people transform it into this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
That is one of the biggest inventions that nowadays there is not a satisfactory explanation for how people did it.
Wow. Other than
See,
yes. Yeah.
one row of seeds
Hmm.
transformed into 10 rows. And that means food surpluses. And if you have food surpluses, you have healthy people. And healthy people was able to produce art like this. That
Mhm.
when some researchers started to figure out how they made these massive tons monuments, they made these experiments to walk a 32 tons block 40 meters. They needed 250 people. In
Ah,
Indonesia, to move a block of 9 tons 4 kilometers took 345. So how these people did it?
yeah.
And let me show you why is the question so amazing. Here, Cerro de Sintepec, that is the source where the stones were taken and they were moved up to this place in San Lorenzo. How they made it? So they use the rivers, but they have to be well fed.
Mm.
They move these stones up to the sea. From the sea, they move to the mouth of the river Coatzacoalcos,
Hmm.
and upstream they move all this way up to this place
Wow.
where the heads were found. So, but how particular is this place? Well, it's as I said before, it was fertile land because during the rainy season it gets full of water. The floodings are not bad. The floodings make lagoons and they are full of food. And when this land gets dry during the dry season, the best places for corn, pumpkins, beans, etc. The other side, the manatee, where my friends Ponciano Ortiz and Carmen Rodriguez found these fresh rubber balls, this access of jade. You know where the the closest source of jade is in Guatemala.
Wow.
The other pieces, other materials came from Michoacan, that's central Mexico. So how they did it? How they did it? And that is what the puzzles are. And that's why we need to recover this information. So going to cacao, deep into the tropical rainforest. This is the way you look inside a tropical rainforest, plants all over it. So how come these people put attention in these cacao fruits? See, the cacao grows out of the trunk. And the domestication processes they made is completely different because they, as I said, the domestication of trees do not focus only on the species of interest, but the domestication of the forest itself. And for you to have an idea, now going further, now with the Maya, see the kind of interaction that the Maya had. See, here, this lord is receiving a base of foaming chocolate because the foam was the most precious part of the drink. It was not the liquid. See? Here, the relation between monkeys and cacao is very well seen here as well as the distributors of cacao bringing in their bags in a euphemistic way of showing the distribution of cacao. And here is one of the oldest depiction of how cacao foam was produced. I don't know if you can see it, but I will highlight it in this one. See?
Oh, okay, aeration. Okay.
So cacao foam was not produced by beating. This is a Spanish invention. It was dropped from one to other vessel. These are some of the vessels that were found 600 BC. And for example, Fray Diego de Landa, he said that the foam was the most delicious. The Lacandon said that they make the foam with a vine. And one of the findings that I made during my PhD research was that we found how they make the chocolate foam with the Mazatec. I don't know if you can see it here.
Yes.
Can you see it?
Yep.
They are selling just the foam. They don't sell the liquid. They sell the foam.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting. Yeah.
So I asked, how you made the foam? He said, well, we put chupipe. And what is chupipe? Well, chupipe is this plant, is these flowers. And here there is another incredible process of domestication. From 2,000 species of this family, it happens that most of the species are poisonous. So how did people made to select just the ones who makes foam? That's another very, very interesting way of thinking of the relationship between people and plants.
Wow.
Let me show you. Okay. Now, going to the distribution of cacao, working in from Mexico up to South America, there are more than 90,000 species in the American tropics, more than tropical Africa and Madagascar together, etc. So trees are the more important component of the tropical rainforest because No trees, no leaves, no organic matter, no organisms, etc. So the point that I was the hypothesis I was trying to test was how come if the origin, evolutionary speaking, of cacao is here, how come the center of domestication was here?
Oh, interesting.
So I tried to look for evidence, and I found in all files this group of people, the Valdivia, they were living 3,500 years ago, and they were traveling from this part, and probably it's probable that they brought some varieties of cacao to southern Mexico, and in return, they brought avocado, because avocado is not native of South America. If you find an avocado in the tropical rainforest of South America in the Amazon, it's because somebody brought it, because avocado is not native from this area.
So
So
they had
I
early
was
trade
looking,
networks. Yeah.
I was looking in Peru. See, in Peru, I was visiting the museums, and I found this museum that is from a mercenary of art, a guy where you go just by invitation. And I found this small vessel here, which seems like some cacao pods hanging. But the other thing is this monkey face here, and the area is coming from the Tembladera place, which is down. So here is a close-up of the spider monkey, showing the relation between the highlands and the tropical rainforest in the lowlands. Then I went to the Museo Larco and found these. These are like cacao pods. This is another one, cacao pods. However, the formal story, because Humboldt said that we haven't found any drink like prepare of cacao in the Orinoco, it was stated that nobody drink cacao in South America, in spite that there are many indigenous groups down in Venezuela where he was collecting. The thing is that nobody knew anything from the Venezuelan groups up to the beginning of the 20th century. And we found a drink that is exactly the same as chocolate, called chorote, in the Venezuelan area, the Maracaibo and Merida. And it's called chorote because they use these vessels that are called chorote and were originally used to drink chicha. Chicha is a corn fermented drink.
Right.
So I went to the archives and found historical evidence. Alonso de Zamora, Juan López de Velasco, Fray Pedro de Simón, that by the end of the 1600, 1700, they were in the area and they saw huge amounts of cacao plantations. But all the time, the story was that it was the Spaniards who brought the cultivation of cacao to South America. And we have to remember that they were mercenaries. They were not agronomists. So everything was leading that cacao was cultivated there. So I was working in the Amazon and I was sharing with the Huaorani people. The Huaorani people first encounter with the Western society was at the end of the 50s. They are nomads, semi-nomads, very healthy. Their language is not related with any other language around. So that means that they have been there for a long time.
Yeah.
And I went with there into the forest, and they just chew the seeds and throw the seeds. But that doesn't mean that all the indigenous group has to do that. And finally, and you won't believe it, where I found this evidence. It was in Paris. And in Paris, I met a colleague, excellent, very nice person, archaeologist, Francisco Valdez, who was working in Santa Ana, La Florida. This is in Ecuador. In this area, he found this archaeological site, and he found these vessels that, and also this cacao stone shape.
Oh, wow.
And within these vessels, they made analysis, and they found theobromine, showing that cacao was drink in South America 5,500 years ago. So this is a different story. And now I want to highlight the relation of cacao, Europe, or Africa. I don't know if it's okay. I keep going, or
Yes,
should I
please
stop?
do.
I do have one question. Back up on the unusual vessels. Were those functional or decorative?
Number 96.
Yeah. Did the shape of the vessels have something to do with the foam or
No, they were to drink. They were the way they hang it.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Ah,
So okay, let's
Yeah.
go to the cacao, Europe, Africa.
yes.
And for this, I have to try to talk about this idea that the age of discovery, as we have been taught from high school to college, is that the age of the discoveries started with Europeans when they found America. No? And that, according to new evidence, is not true. The story begins at least 100 years before. See, when in 1324, Mansa Musa, the king of Mali, decided to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. He traveled all this way. This pilgrimage from here all the way, he stayed in Cairo, and he came onto Mecca, and during this trip, he gave away around 18 tons of gold that for more than 10 years, he made that the price of gold was lower than silver, more than a decade. This was known as a story, as soon as the maps were improving, the Portugal, the Avis dynasty, that was a very weak kingdom, they were not allowed to go. They were not allowed to go to the Mediterranean Sea for goods. So all they had was to travel to the west, and in a tacking technique, they started to travel all the way to South Africa in order to find the gold, that gold that Mansa Musa was saying he had. So they found this place in what now is Ghana. It's called Elmina in 1471. And 5 years after finding Elmina, where usual people was wearing gold, the income was 30% was coming from Elmina. And I have to highlight that Portuguese did not conquer. It was a trading situation because they were very poor.
I see.
By that time, they found these two islands, Sao Tome and Principe, and by 1485, they started what they call French, our French called prison industrial labor camps, where they were enslaving people by the color of their skin.
I
Mm.
see.
So in this old situation, you know who was working for the Portuguese? Columbus. Columbus was working for the Portuguese, and he learned how to travel in this way that you go to west in order to go to east. So you go deep and then go back. And that is how he was promoted by the king and queen of Spain, not to look for the spices in India, but to look for gold, because it was thought that 5 degrees up and 5 degrees down from the equator is where the gold was found.
I see.
That was the idea. So in 1492, they arrived, and then things completely change, okay? And start the colonization processes as I Mrs. Fair very, very cleverly stated. So Columbus, with his mercenaries, thought they had found Japan, and what they found was the Western Hemisphere. And there's a very nice cartoon of Carson that I want to share with you. When Columbus left, he said, "Did you detect something a little ominous in the way they said see you later?" Because 1 year later, Alexander the Sixth, the Pope, one of the worst people have been ever born, he divided the continent with a blessing. He said, from north to south, to the right, everything will belong to Portugal. From north to south, to the left will belong to Spain. And so, in the second trip, Columbus goes and establishes in La Isabela the first settlement of Spanish people. And some things came out right away. 3 relevant issues: the racism, the astonishment for the diversified system of production of the indigenous people, and the admiration for the immense biological diversity. In his third trip is that Columbus goes back. He was not allowed to go back to La Isabela, to Española, because he was a very bad governor. He was chased, he got lost, and he ended up here in the Guanaja Island in the Gulf of Honduras. And what is relevant is because in this island, they were arriving a group of merchants from Campeche. This is in Mexico. When they met, they found this. They had fine cotton clothes, sticks with sharp stone razor blades that it will be like an AK-47, and small copper axes, and many of those almonds. And this is what Columbus' son said. It seems these are very valuable almonds, because when we brought them with all of their goods aboard, I realized that when one of these almonds fell to the ground, everyone stopped to pick it up as if an eye had fell from their faces. And what they had found was cacao.
Ah,
Mm. Mm.
That was the first encounter. Okay? So up to this point, is the relation, people, traditional knowledge, Europe, Africa, and now traditional knowledge. I want to go very briefly. Why is important? It's important because it shows that our different ways of relation, as I said before, and different solutions to our problems.
Yes.
Okay, so when money grew on trees, I want for you to make a simile, and well, cacao was drunk at least 3,000 years ago. So when the Spanish arrived, news started to cross the Atlantic. How was CNN in colonial times? Can you imagine? Well, the news that went there was written by a guy who never came here. And he said, I'm well aware that people of feeble imagination will accuse me of being fantastic when I speak of trees bearing money. San Pedro Martir d'Angleria. But when Fernando González de Oviedo, chronicler of the Crown, described what was going on, he showed how the cacao plantations were made. Here is one evidence, and here is the other one, how they had to grow in the shade. And why is this important? Because the way he described these plantations is very similar to how people nowadays in many places of southern Mexico do it. As I said before, a student of mine checked 56 plantations, and she found 66 different species in this cacao plantation with this density. And as I said, the cacao plantations are corridors for amphibians, mammalians. This is a rubber plant, and all this is to contrast with the Occidental way of thinking, where the individualization of knowledge is the most important thing. Who cure the cure for what? The theory of evolution. Everything is personalized. It doesn't belong to the people. It's one person. However, there is a guy who is working in Arizona, by the way. He said the humans make use of insights and adaptations that we do not understand. We learn very often not by figuring out how things work, but by imitating others, because we are a social species. So going back to the past, the cacao production nowadays in the world is 10 million hectares, 5 million producers, 4 million tons, and the main producers are Africa and Indonesia. What do cacao's producers have in common around the world? They produce in 2 or less hectares. They are the backbone to generate $120,000 million a year, and most of them are living in very, very high poverty. What do the 5 main country producers have in common? They have Occidental methods of exploiting diversity. How Africa became the first producer in cacao? Well, none of these countries have a cultural background on diversified agroforestry systems. And these countries started the cultivation of cacao just after slavery was forbidden in America. The case of Ivory Coast, just for you to have an idea of what is going on, almost 120,000 extra hectares have been lost the populations of primates are disappearing, and accusation of kidnapping and abuse of children to force them to work in cacao. That is what's happening. And the main problem we are facing with cacao for poor people to develop is that they usually have very simple methods to make chocolate. Look at this. This is my cousin making chocolate.
Oh. Wow.
So in order to try to improve local communities, we are trying to promote different ways of thinking. So we need to change the rules. And the problem is that when people try to improve and give extra value to the product, this is what happened. The president of Ghana said that they had to stop selling raw materials.
Hmm.
But what happened when he declares that he won't sell any more raw materials to the colonizers? The president of Switzerland said, it's quite simple. We need the raw materials and you have them. So give it to us.
Mhm.
And the problem is that things are not improving. The reality is that when Akufo-Addo and the companies decided, agree to put an extra value to the cacao, they were moving to other places and they stopped buying the cacao of these people, leaving them in poverty.
Hmm.
So the last part that I want to talk is the cultivation of cacao and what we have been doing with our project with the Mazatec people.
Yes.
This is the area where we have been working. This is one of the main mountains there. We work with 19 families, and the idea was to imitate local and regional communities trying to overcome centuries of being neglected and ejected from their territories. So we work with 5 principles, trying to find not accumulate richness, but looking for autonomy, solidarity, food sovereignty, regional sustainability through the use, the implementation of diversified systems of production. And what we did was from mapping the grasslands, helping the people how to measure with rustic tools, using their own cacao pods to produce the seedlings, working with all the community, producing their own seedlings, see,
Oh, wow. Hmm.
and start transforming these grasslands
Mhm.
through a process. Here you can see bananas, manihot, wrapping tamales leaves. They intermingle corn. In the meantime, the plants of cacao are growing, pumpkins as well, as you can see. And here the manihot is growing, the bananas growing, and this is at 8 months where the plantation, the cacao plants are already with shade. See, this is the huge manihot plants. They, at 8 months, they are harvesting the manihot. These are the cacao leaves used for wrapping tamales. these are the citrics that we, instead of selling the bags of oranges, we decided to make limoncello and narancello, who was a really big success.
Oh, good.
So this is, at the end, this is the way the grassland end up. See, is with shade, with cacao.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to give an extra value to the seeds and not sell the raw materials, we started to train people in making
Products. Yeah.
elaborated, high quality cacao chocolate bars. So we were training these farmers in order to know how make high quality chocolate. See, they end up making very, very nice tablets. These bonbons with the brand. They made truffles. And we end up, for example, with the seeds they locally produce, they made energetic bars covered with chocolate. And that's it, how it ended up in a local fair where it was sold very, very successfully. So I think with that, I will say thank you. And I'm sorry that I couldn't show the videos and all that.
But Paul, you were saying the videos aren't
Yeah.
yeah. But thank you so much, and for all the success that you've done on the local and community level. And you're right. I mean, it really is part of an ecosystem, and that ecosystem involves the economics and the value systems and the politics and the support of the people and who gets to thrive. Wow, we just don't understand
I know
the
it.
full depth and breadth of the issues
Wow.
until somebody like you points them out to us. So thank you. That was fascinating. So I think that what we have in common here is let's rethink everything that we do, and let's look at all of the stakeholders involved. Let's look at all of the implications. Let's look at what is truly sustainable and who gets to thrive in this whole scheme of things. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And it's kind of like Rex said in the chat room. He said, the more Nisao speaks, the more we have to revise our sense of their social structure and step away from the Occidental model. And an inspirational talk indeed, much to reflect upon. And of course, the next question is where do we get a hold of the proper high quality cacao chocolate? Where is it available, rather than supporting some of the corporations that don't support the native peoples? And
just extracting resources, but not supporting the whole system and country and people. Let's rethink all that.
Regarding to high quality chocolate, one of the big myths, fake information, is the one that has been taken for granted, that the best chocolate is the Swiss one, or the European, the Belgian chocolate. And the reason is very simple. The lowest cacao quality grown in the world is in Africa. And the worst way of processing, from harvesting, fermenting, drying, is the less control in Africa. And the main source of cacao to making these European chocolates is from Africa. So
cheapest.
They have a lot of techniques. That's true. But if you go for quality, the problem is that most of the chocolate is masked with sugar, with carbohydrate, and
cocoa butter
and fat. Exactly. So it's very difficult to change the perception of the real chocolate. That's what we have been doing here in my lab. We have been making from 70 to 80 cacao. And the first approach of people is, oh no, this doesn't taste like a Hershey.
Mm.
And they don't know that, for example, a Milky Way has 7% of cacao,
Yeah.
and the rest is milk, is sugar, and blah, 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 lecithin.
And the blah, blah, blah.
7%
Lots of blah, blah,
cacao.
blah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. I saw a study where they were giving different chocolate samples dependent on how different countries and different cultures formulate it. And people grow up with their taste imprinted on what they grew up with. It was
Mhm.
interesting how different chocolate concoctions
Well,
can be.
right.
What is the constituents that are a mild entheogen or mild psychoactive or the mood altering components of cacao? I mean, if you're saying that 7% is all that the real cacao is in the popular chocolate, then people aren't enjoying chocolate for those benefits. They're enjoying it because of
To
the
have
fat and the
it's-
sugar and
it's a
the
sugar high.
yeah,
Mhm.
or the different ways in which it's spun into different treats.
Right. It's-
But
they've
what
made-
are the components of cacao that makes it the food of the gods or the theobromine? What is it
Well,
that makes it?
the main one is theobromine, is caffeine and theophylline. Okay,
Uh-huh.
and the problem nowadays is that people do not get a chocoholic because of chocolate, but because of sugar.
Right.
Yes.
Did you know that the industrial revolution was more successful since the British took in 1650 Barbados, and from Barbados started to produce massive amounts of sugar that went into Britain, London, and these big factories where people used to drink beer because if they drink water, they prefer a hangover than a diarrhea. So people
Too much
started to
biomass in the
drink
water.
sugar with a lot of components, tea, coffee, and in 1650, if I am not wrong, it was when the first time in Europe, in Oxford, I think, was created the first coffee place where people started to talk without alcohol. They started to be sober and they changed the whole conversation. Then someone decided to print a paper sheet with the new ships that were coming and the gossips from the kings, and the newspapers took place there. And all this, but sugar was fundamental to change, and people with more energy work longer hours. And that's all with sugar. So nowadays people think it's eating chocolate, and they are eating basically sugar.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, which doesn't have any health benefits,
Right. Right.
by the
right.
way.
Yeah.
So quite the opposite.
Right.
Interesting.
Wow.
I want to also say you make a really interesting point is that in our Western culture, it's about celebrating the individual who invents or who puts his mark, we just this individualism. Whereas prior, even with art was a product of a culture. This agricultural innovation product of a culture. It's the culture that takes pride in these inventions, not the individual in these indigenous societies. And so that's a huge shift,
Mhm.
right? Pride and culture versus the individual. That's just interesting. I mean, we're brought up in a culture and it's hard to see beyond its blinders, isn't it? But it's such an exciting journey to understand that the way we are isn't the only way we have to be. There's other ways of being, and some of them make a lot more sense with a different set of values. So for me, it just comes down, what are we really saying? What's the story that we're really spinning here? and why?
Mhm.
What is the values?
Right.
You know, what makes sense in a society? What makes sense in a world? I appreciate all the gifts of my culture, but I also see the heavy price that we're paying.
Mhm.
So what is our future going to be? How are we going to come together and create a future where we all can thrive, where everything gets to thrive?
There seems to be an
Yeah.
awakening. More and more time has come by
Yeah.
where there's more and more discussions about these kinds of topics. I mean, it's a big deal in the last 20 or 30 years to start talking about organic gardening again and talking about being off the grid. Well, off the grid organic gardening is not a new concept. It's been
Yeah.
around, and but there's a renewal of interest, and everybody's coming back around, and you know, researchers and scholars like yourself that are bringing the knowledge to the forefront, maybe mainstream a little bit more so, where we can embrace this understanding of that full relationship of all humanity. I mean, that full relationship that we've been taken off center, and we need to come back to center for survival, for humanity to find its place with this planet. So,
Well, you said something else interesting. Let's talk about organic. I remember a discussion with a woman from Singapore who had looked into GMOs, genetically modified organisms, and a
she was
debate
a
with
food
somebody
scientist.
else.
Yeah.
And she was saying, you don't understand in your first world perspective that we really need to feed the world, and that we need to hybridize. And I mean, you don't understand the benefits of GMO. Everybody's like, I only can do organic. It's not possible to feed the world. That's an interesting question I want to pose to you. But also, we had these mastered hybridizers. You mentioned corn, a single stalk of seed, juicy seeds versus 10 on an ear of corn. How did we get from that to this? Well, they didn't have GMO. They weren't gene splicing in a laboratory, but they were looking at working with nature, hybridizing through many, many, many generations of knowledge, of putting them together in cultivation. I'd
Right.
like to ask you about that. But also, you also mentioned, hey, when you're talking about organics and these small farmers, they can't afford to go out and get lab tests to prove that they're organic. They just can't afford the fertilizers. So they're using organic because it's the best method for their cultivation. So I'm going to put all that in your lap, Nisao, and have you speak to that. Then we're going to go to the many hands that are in
Yeah,
our audience.
the problem with
Raised.
the organic is that this original good willing strategy to eat good things has been transformed as everything else in business.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So if we just take a look what I said before, that around at least 70% of the food we consume all over the world is produced in underdeveloped countries like Mexico, and is produced by around 570 million families that to produce, they use only the family's hands labor. That tells you something.
Yeah.
Now, in the case of cacao, when they say, oh, is that we need cacao or organic cacao, and like me, that we have been dealing with producers, and we know that most of the producers are less than 2 hectares. And these people are very, very bad paid. See, yesterday I was talking with some of my friends in Tabasco, and they are paying $1 per kilogram of seed, cacao seed.
Mm.
So, and for to have an analysis of an organic land, you have to pay $3,000-4,000 at least to certify that this organic.
Like way out of scale.
People doesn't have that money
Right.
because they are surviving. And the other point is that there's no credibility for the small farmers. Mm? If a small farmer gets in a relation with somebody who will buy, and they talk together, then they will see that when small farmers, honest people, tells you something, they keep their word because that's all they have.
Mm-hmm.
So people is not trying to cheat all over the world. And this is what needs to change. How come my land is organic? Yeah. Why? Because I am barely surviving. I have no money for pesticides. I have no money for fertilizers. So all I am doing is trying to produce. And the other point, very important, that I want to highlight is that people think that plantations such as cacao
Mm-hmm.
are infinite.
Mm.
And no, it's finite,
Finite. Yeah.
Yeah.
finite. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are no let's grow and grow and grow. No, it's limited.
Mm-hmm.
And the shade
Supply and demand.
plantations that preserve the ecosystems
Mm.
are smaller.
Gotcha.
And what do we need to do is to pay a price to
Commensurate
sustain
with.
not only the chocolate, but to sustain the ecosystems and the people who grow under these circumstances.
Yeah.
Fortunately, nowadays, there is a market that is growing, that is aware that by paying an extra value, they are supporting the preservation, the conservation, not only of the cacao traditional plantations, but also from the fauna surrounding the the cacao plantations, the way of producing, the local communities. If you have well prices for the production of cacao, there won't be need for young people to leave the small towns.
The villages.
Right.
Yeah.
Or deal with narcotics, right? Because they need to make, but also
Exactly.
why? Yeah. But why transport? Here's my raw good. I'm going to transport it across an ocean to get manufactured here and then packaged and then across the ocean to sell in America. You know, why not just keep as local as we can, right?
Right, yeah.
We just really aren't going to have the
Mhm.
carbon footprint bandwidth to just traipse across. Why not keep
Because
local?
because the problem is that the chain of production of cacao
Yeah.
is chopped,
Right.
so that the one who produce doesn't know where the seeds go,
Right.
doesn't know in which are
Yeah.
transformed. The one who produce the chocolates doesn't know where the seeds are coming from, and he has not a clue how these people is surviving.
Yeah. I
So
also heard
when
about
we
Finish.
when we try to stick together all the parts linking the chain, we face another problem, and that is the machinery.
Mhm.
If I want to buy in Mexico a machinery to process the paste and make high quality chocolate,
Right.
Yes.
I have to pay an extra payment, a tax from the Mexican government to
Wow.
import that machine.
Mhm.
So it's very difficult for a farmer who has 2 hectares of land to
Right.
buy these machines.
Unless they
Yes.
go in with a cooperative with all their neighbors or
That is
something
what
like
we
that.
have been trying. That is what we have been trying. But
Right.
it takes time because money is not easily to get when you say, well, this is for the well-being of a community.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
And
no
people
farmer with
usually,
just 2
what is the
hectares of
business?
beans is going to keep a machine going full time.
Right.
You
Right.
need a community, you need the volume, you need the scale, right? You
Yeah.
need the cooperation, you need, all of
Even
that.
even in the
And
West.
what we are trying to do with communities
Yeah.
is try to talk with them and let them know, or that they themselves realize that the point is not making money, is to solve their local problems. How they are gonna do that? The first thing they have to do, well, we'll try to help with that, is to be self-sufficient in what they eat.
Yeah.
Do not finish with the resources they are living around.
Right.
And how do they make that? Through solidarity attitudes. How come? By setting diversified agroforestry systems so that you can have different resources all the year around. And the important thing here is being well fed. The same with the pigs that we are introducing for the backyard of the family's house.
Right. Take care of those
Yeah.
as well.
Let's
Not just create stuff to export. I just want to say, I heard a similar story in Africa with a lake that was supporting every community around it and was pristine and beautiful and lots of fish. Well, somebody comes in and wants to grow tilapia. And so now the lake is full of just one monoculture tilapia and the processing of it. So it's ruined the communities and they can't
Sure.
afford the fish
Over and
that
over
they used to
and over.
sustain them.
Right.
And so it just became just, let's grab resources and extract them and export them, but leave nothing for the local
Short-term
community.
thinking.
So, I mean, how is that
I know. Well, we see
fair?
those
How is that
examples
good?
over and over
How is that
again.
allowed?
Yeah.
But
I'm going to
let's
go.
to, here you go.
Okay. Lelania has her hand up first. Lelania, would you like to go ahead and ask you a question, a comment? Here we are.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. That was so interesting and informative. And I happen to be a chocolate addict, I'll admit it. And, you know, when I was younger, I did all the sugar chocolates. But now I live in Hawaii on Maui, we grow cacao here. We have sacred cacao ceremonies. It's honored. We have a lot of organic farming. And in my local market, Mana, which Paul and Laura Lee probably know, I got these two. This is 100% cacao, no sugar. So it has cacao. This one's from Colombia. Cacao butter. I'm curious what cacao butter is, and vanilla flavoring. This one has the same ingredients, and it's the cacao is sustainably sourced from ecologically diverse farms in South America. I think it might be made in California, but I mean, the no sugar cacao is definitely an acquired taste, but it's incredibly delicious. And I just want to let you know that we're working for you on the cacao here in Maui. Thank you so much. Gracias, muchas gracias.
Yeah, beautiful, Lelania. Thank you. And Lelania, you'll help us source some for our gathering that's coming up in September.
Oh yes, when you said bring treats, that's what I'm bringing.
Good deal. Fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Aloha.
Thank you, Lelania.
Eye-opening, wasn't it? A little heart-rendering to see what a mess we're in. But,
right. Well, you know, Laura and I, years ago, probably about 8 years ago or something, Laura was going through the archives of the Institute, and there was a guy that lives in Santa Fe who says, I do cacao ceremony.
Mark Shisenti.
And Laura said, well, maybe I'll call Mark up and see what he's up to. And so Mark came out to the Institute, and we laid out our big conference table. And
he invited a bunch of people.
And he laid out all the different things. And like Lelania said, it's an acquired taste. If you're looking for that sugary taste that you're so used to with American chocolate or even European chocolate, forget it. This is not that kind of a ritual. And so it was a kind of
froth stuff up though.
Yeah, but we did have that thing. But what
it was right to be of a tea ceremony in Japan, right? It was very sacred. You treated it with very much respect.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, but the long and short of the story, and I'll keep it real short because we're staying with the cacao theme, but that ritual, that coming together, Mark at the end of his ritual said, and by the way, my mother owns land next door. We said, what? So my mother has land that she said, I don't know what the family wants to do with it. None of us want it. We ended up working with his mother, and the Institute was able to acquire another 190 acres of land as part of preserving, because this land is rich with ancestral village artifacts and everything else. We wanted to protect it, that it never gets built on or whatever. So anyway, it was that sacred ceremony of cacao ended up really being something that impacted the land of the Institute as well. Okay, Rex, you're up next.
Okay, thanks very much. I wanted to thank Tony Hull for actually commenting on enslaved earlier on. It just suddenly opened a big box for me, because I was in Malaya, Sarawak in the 60s, and and had the same experience was going on there with rubber. Because once you plant a rubber tree, you destroy the local agriculture, and it takes 40 years. Sorry, it's only useful for 40 years, and then you're left with nothing, because the ground is completely barren, and I don't know how long it takes for it to recover. So, this is a very common story where, as you say, Occidental sort of culture takes over and frankly enslaves the people, because, and I really go along with this idea that really the cost of anything, they should take into account what they're doing to the people that they buy from, because it will destroy people, because sadly they are offered all sorts of products. So this idea of wanting something instead of just meeting their needs comes into the equation, and that's what enslaves them.
And it enslaves the land as well.
This is, well, it destroys the land around them, which is why they don't have any choice, because they've made their money. For instance, they made their money selling the rubber. Then all of a sudden there's nothing else, and there is no land, there is no rubber, it dries up, and then everyone runs away and goes somewhere else. Or somebody says, oh, we'll give you a factory and you can, at piecemeal horrible rates, we can enslave you and you can work in a factory. This is the Occidental destruction of frankly life.
Thank you.
So it's been very powerful, reminding me of all of these other elements this hour, and I'm most grateful for what you've said. It was fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
you're
want
right.
to comment some more?
No, he's right. I mean, he describes perfectly how the system, the Occidental system works.
Yes. Well, very good. Thank you, Rex. Yeah, good comments. And of course, anyone else who would like to share, please do raise your hands and we'll share with you. And we saw a documentary film many years ago. It's a little bit off topic, but then again, it's that similar thing of enslavement, where in this country, they set up these things, well, please recycle your computer. And they put them on pallets and they wrap them all up, and all of a sudden it becomes a boatload and trailer truck loads, and all these computers get loaded up, and then they're sent to some third world country where people are sitting on the ground trying to strip the wire for the
little bit of metal value.
a little bit of metal value or whatever. Just horrific conditions. It was just mind blowing to see what we think we're doing as trying to be green. Oh yeah, I'm going to recycle, and then how that actually gets transferred. So we need to definitely keep continuing with the growth.
What's an ideal world look like to you, Nisao?
That's a good question.
What is, if the world just could get reset into the values that would allow everybody and everything to thrive in harmony, what would that look like? How would it work?
I think the first point would be that we are not owners of anything.
Yes.
We are just passing by, and we have to learn that when we achieve something, it's not the result of serendipitous imagination or a sudden idea that came out, but it's the result of the sharing of society. Society, if we are going to improve, we need to acknowledge that there is more than one way of doing things right. There are many ways of doing things right. However, the problem is when you impose only one way, and that imposing way is to accumulate goods, money, blah, blah, blah. And we don't have time for enjoying people, enjoying to be in a nice place, and above all, the production needs to be shared for the welfare of the community. We need to start changing and try to include the community, because the desires of one person should not be more important than the desires or the objectives of a community. So what we have been trying is to promote that, at least with the people I'm working with, is that the interest of one person cannot be more important than the interest of the community. And in that journey, then, excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. In that journey, we have to learn, because it's not easy. We have to decolonize our minds. And that is very, very difficult when we are dealing with young people, when we are dealing for money as the main actor in whatever we do. If we share community values, then there will be no need for young people to leave the community for immigration. One of the things that I have been told when I go to the communities, I like to talk a lot, as much as I can, with the people. And in a meeting we had, more than 50 people were together. I asked one lady, I asked her, what do you need to be happy?
What she said.
And she looked at me and she said, what I would like, what I need to be happy is that each Sunday I could be here with my son that is in the United States working 15 years ago. My daughter left to the Mexico City, and my grandsons are leaving now to Cancun to work. I would like to have them here and eat together. That's what I want. I don't need more.
The simplest, most basic family unit. You know, it's interesting how we talk about let's work with nature and not against her for an ecosystem, but also look what we're doing to our own bodies and souls, as you've just pointed out. How is it that we're working against our very nature and what makes us healthy and happy? Look at the food substances that you're talking about. Chocolate, we've adulterated it, so it's full of sugar. I recommend the Sugar Film on Netflix.
Right.
Watch that. That'll change your diet. Paul and I watched that in November. We haven't eaten sugar since. We actually read all the hidden sugars and avoid those as well. I mean, just saying, like, wow. Look at tobacco and how we've adulterated another sacred substance into a poison with the additives and the way that we use it.
Right.
So we're not even taking these sacred plant botanicals and using them for our own health, but for just to support addictions and the dis-ease of our environment, as well as
just look cocaine.
Yes.
Oh my
Cocaine.
gosh. Yeah.
Coca leaves in Colombia Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia are sacred ones. And
Yeah,
they
I
are used, they are shared to keep friendship, and they are energetic
Yes.
to be walking all the mountains. And they are nutritious.
Yeah.
And
But
help you
take
sustain
away
a
the
higher
cocaine
elevation.
out of the leaf,
Mhm,
and then you have these huge problems.
Yes.
mhm.
And,
Yeah.
and maybe speak for a moment about the indigenous perspective of the spirit of these plants, because that gets lost in conversation as well, is that when you talk about this, they understood it and had a relationship. They saw life contained within it. They felt an importance
Deep
to be
wisdom.
deep wisdom. They felt an
Yeah.
importance to have an honoring relationship, not to be an abusive, just like a family member.
We talked to a tobacco shaman a couple of months ago, and he was talking about that as really a sacred plant. Do you know much about the sacred aspect of tobacco, for
Well,
example?
I'm just saying in
I
general.
just want to ask if he knows
No,
people who are doing.
not tobacco, but yesterday I was talking with one of my friends I'm working with in the mountains of the Mazatec area, and they are very respectful with mushrooms as hallucinogenic
Oh, yeah,
mushrooms.
another one. Yeah.
And we were talking because he more than once has told me that I would be invited for to take a trip with the mushrooms, but with the only conditions that it has to be under their context, not my context.
Yeah.
So, and there's a whole ritual because you alter your senses, and you can hear a cricket in the corner of the house, and lights that can be very difficult for the experience. So you need to be very respectful, and you need at least 7 days for or 10 days for the whole process, since before, during, and after. So
Big
there
commitment.
is, there is a
Proper
lot
way.
that we should respect from especially indigenous cultures, and try to learn from them more than go and try to teach them.
Good point.
That's really
Good
important.
point.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. And then having the proper administration of these that have that history for the proper relationship between how we conduct ritual, whether it's with mushroom or whether it's with cacao or whether it's, go back to the peoples that have the families, the traditions, the culture to understand its proper perspective. Of course, we're challenged by the fact that Western culture always wants to jump ahead, and
Give me the magic bullet and just like, let me take a pill and let it be done.
There's like new fashions, ways of using sacred plants nowadays. For example, in Mexico, it's very popular to use ayahuasca.
Right.
People who feel spiritual, they just take ayahuasca without any context, without any respect. I have been in Peru where they use it, and it's a really, really something issue, very respectful. You have to be very, very careful. And here, there is a guy who has a temazcal, this like sauna place with heat. They get in, out, they take ayahuasca, and now they are in contact with the spirits. Okay, I respect that, but I don't think it should be the most appropriate way of approaching these plants that are, from my perspective, must be very respectful.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. And very
our work is really about, you don't need that. You've got it within you to activate these same channels. So
the original foundation of this institute was looking at what is that natural state within ourselves that we can have these type of relationships without necessarily having to resort to plant medicine only, that it's within our own physiology. And so there's been that respect, that avenue, that track of experience
Built within us.
that's built
Yeah.
within us, that we see indigenous cultures worldwide. So it's one of those avenues that goes side by side as well, that we carry that ability, that wisdom tradition of having a foot in both worlds. And yeah.
So, wow.
Well, I wanted to mention, let me see, a couple questions. Number one, Lee had said, all you got to do is just go ahead and
Well, Lee,
log
you're
on.
here. Why don't you
She said,
comment?
yeah, go ahead and search the term Nestle company on Google, and you'll see the
Nestle
word
conglomerate.
100 billion a year, and the story is quite overwhelming there as well. Yeah. And
Rex says we can't reset Western culture. As individuals, we have to relearn what it means to be alive. As individuals, sacred task, right? Joseph
Decolonize.
Decolonize, yeah.
Joseph Chilton Pierce offered much on this, as do several others. Happy to share. Thank you. We relate to the world we have created and not this beautiful planet we call Earth. Very long.
Yeah, that's a good quote too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Kelly's asking, what can we do as consumers to help this situation?
Yeah.
I think what we need to do is to try to pay attention to what is in the envelope and try to search. For example, I won't try a good chocolate with less than 70%. No, it has been proved that the blood pressure can be lowered when you eat a piece this size of chocolate every night, if it is 70%.
70 or higher. Right?
Yeah, I've had a naturopathic doctor recommend one little square, that's all you need, of a dark, well-made cacao chocolate a day.
And that is, it has been demonstrated with the statistics that it will lower your blood pressure.
It has many other health benefits as
Wow.
well. Yeah.
Karen has her hand
others.
up. Hi, Karen. I'm going to bring you up on screen. And you are.
Yes, I should like to say that I'm really so happy to hear about your work with to making the desert land to fertile rainforest, because this is something I'm so sad about, to hear how the rainforest in the Amazonas and other places are being destroyed and made into desert-like monocultures. So thank you for that. This is some hope, a glimpse of hope.
Yes, thank you, Karen. Yeah.
And, I have to ask, what would we Westerners give up to have a sustainable practice around the world? What are we willing to give up? I also want to say that I appreciate Santa Fe. You mentioned the folk art festival.
Yeah.
That's an annual event in Santa Fe where they actually bring in the indigenous people who made the art
villages around the world.
Yep. And they curate it, and they ask them to wear their traditional costumes. It's a huge celebration. The opening ceremonies for this 3-day festival, where they set up around the beautiful museums, these booths. It's really quite something to witness. They have a parade around the central plaza. Every family, it's usually family members, dressed in their indigenous traditional costumes. They get up on the stage, they play like 30 seconds of their traditional music,
and then they announce,
dance, they're welcome. So one by one, people from all over the world,
they'll announce each group. They'll say like Ghana, and the crowd roars, and then comes to Ghana, and they do a dance, and then Indonesia, and then one by one, and
alphabetically,
just
and then they all pile into the central plaza,
and then we all
whips out their phones, and then it's a big meet and greet, and y'all trade hats, right? And you take pictures of each other, and it's just like a fabulous festival.
We dance for hours.
So,
Great.
Oh my God, it's fun. So
wow.
They're done that. So beautiful.
Fantastic.
So
well,
what if more communities supported that and invited people to come and just say, here, it's actually thrilling to look at the goods and hear the stories from the people who made them. It adds to the experience to appreciate all their art. So
Yep. And Lisa, you can search it online, heirloom cacao in the US. So you can buy it, and cacao is very high in manganese and calcium.
Magnesium and calcium.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Uh,
Any agri-monoculture will deplete the land of its nutrients for all plant life eventually.
And then,
And adding what the monoculture needs doesn't help. Right.
right.
Actually, nature supports biodiversity. Right.
That was Rex.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've come to the end of the hours, but wow, fantastic, wonderful to have the opportunity to, share your research and for open our eyes a little bit to the. I had when I talked about the cacao, I mean, I had that little bit of that sliver of knowledge about cacao ceremony, but what you presented today, the impact and the spectrum of it is so far-reaching that very little that people would know about this without someone like
Let's
yourself.
write the true history, the full history.
Absolutely.
I want to just say you were a Fulbright, you got a Fulbright scholarship to study in America at the University of California for 7 years. What did that give you, just hanging out on this side of the border? What did that give you for those 7 years in this culture? And what did you bring back?
Well, one of the best things is that I had the opportunity to have friends from all over the world. California is one of the most diverse places in the world. And I had friends from Korea, Japan, from Senegal, from London, Italy, France. So it was a very, very, very good experience. And above all, I took advantage by learning how to cook food from all these different countries. And now I will say that I love to cook this international food from all over the world. Thai food is one of my favorites.
Yeah, but you got to watch out for the sugar in Thai food. But I agree.
Okay, I want to say that from my perspective, we're all enslaved. Everybody, you just heard from all these people saying we want the world to make sense. We want a world where all of us can thrive and all the species can thrive and all the plants. We want a world that's harmonious. We're all enslaved by the system. We're all trying to rethink it and do our best to change it. So I just want to say sometimes it's hardest for us, the beneficiaries of this system, right, to change. But we want a better world. I think that's what we all have in common here, and we're
I think one of the nice things is that there's people like you guys that from their own corner are trying to do their efforts and are trying to invite people like me to share with you what we know. And this is work by people, individual by individual. We are spreading the word that things need to be changed. And unfortunately, the voice that you have is still too little. It has to be bigger, so that more people can have this opportunity to learn, not only from what I said, but from the things that you have been promoting through your institute.
Oh, thank you.
That's why we're trying to move the dial with dialogue, right? So thank you so much, Nisao. Appreciate it. I know that you have many people here that want to thank you as well for all the work that you do, not just today's presentation that was beautiful, but all the work that you've been doing to help so many communities, to help the ecosystem, to help just put it on the table how we can change.
Thank you.
So.
And
anytime I can be with you, be free to call.
That's a wonderful option. Thank you so much.
Made new friends today.
Wonderful, inspiring. Carry our lights forward for sustainability.
Well said. All right. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Blessings.